Hi everyone, and welcome back to another Arty class hosted by Shopkeep Arty, our shop platforms used by artists and other creatives to take the hassle out of selling things such as creative gifts, tickets for events, monthly member subscriptions, or personalized clothing, pretty much anything you want. What's more, if you choose to add your designs to items that are supplied by our extensive range of partners, we manufacture them to order and ship direct to your customers, even if it's just one item, so you don't even have to do anything, so it's very easy. For those watching for the first time, be it on this interactive webinar or via YouTube, our free weekly RT classes are designed for all ages and provide a creative escape 2 times a week in the company of amazing award-winning artists. Reason we're doing this is so that you can try and remember it. It's going to be a bit like the X Factor thing. Hopefully in about a year everyone will be doing this. So it's RT classes 2 times a week on a Tuesday and a Thursday at 2:30. So in fact, actually next Tuesday, from next week onwards, we're going to be making it half an hour earlier, and some of you may have received an email from Zoom about that. So from next Tuesday, it'll be starting at 2 o'clock rather than 2:30, just to let you know. You do need to register for each interactive class, and you can do this by visiting shopkeeparty.com and clicking on the Arty classes link in the menu. We're introducing new artists all the time, so I'd recommend that you bookmark that particular page because it's always changing and you can see which artists are coming up, and then you can register for the free class. We've also got other classes on there as well, because our free Arty classes give you a taster of the artist's skills, techniques and presenting style, a bit like we'll be doing with Nial today. However, 45 minutes can really go just like that. So that's why we also provide a paid for private workshop with artists that run for about 2 to 3 hours in length. And these private sessions are much more intimate, giving you the opportunity of soaking up their tips and techniques so you can truly develop your skills and take them to the next level. So it's not only good value compared to an on-site workshop, but it's actually really good fun in the afternoon. So and you end up with a mini masterpiece at the end of the day as well. So it's perfect. This week we're joined by Nial Adams, who has honed his oil painting skills from a very early age. Actually, his dad having been an accomplished oil painter in his own right. Nial's also been featured at on-site workshops such as the Watershed Studios, and has been very, very popular. And as you saw, some of the people were saying hello to him just now. If this is your first time, as someone asked before, Nial and myself can't see or hear you, but you can interact with us. You can raise your hand, so literally tap the screen and press the little hand icon, and I can then invite you in to speak directly to Nial. Alternatively, there's a Q&A panel, and you can just type a question and we can either answer that live or I can respond via typing to you. We'll also stop around halfway, take a bit of a short break, and also ask Nial about his plans for his private workshop on Friday the 3rd of July, which I think is next Friday. But for now, it's time for me to hand over to Nial, and we're going to be painting simple clouds on hopefully a toned canvas, but I guess Nial will walk us through that. So hello, Nial.
Hi, John. Thank you very much. Yeah, hi, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. And again, for those people perhaps watching this on catch-up as well. So we're going to work through something really quite simple, and it's a very interesting exercise. It's also quite a different way of working in oil. Thinking very quickly about the difference in different types of mediums. Obviously, if you're working in watercolor, you're working from light to dark. If you're working in acrylic oil, you're working from dark to light. But we're going to be producing, this is my test piece, my rehearsal piece, which I'm just putting up quickly to show you. So this is what we're going to work towards. And we're going to be working with very, very thin paint. And the reason for that is because we're going to work in a tonal method using a limited palette. And we're also going to be in a position where we're going to keep the paint quite mobile. And this, for me, is probably one of the biggest attractions of working in oil. For those people that haven't used oil before, this is one of the reasons why I encourage people to pick up oil. And if you've got experience in watercolor or certainly in acrylic, you should find it quite easy to adapt to these techniques. So we're going to be
Neil,
working with,
Neil,
yes.
sorry to, Elaine said she hasn't got yellow ochre. What else could she use?
In terms of the toning of the canvas can be toned with anything. It could be toned with a raw umber, it could be toned with sienna, anything that's really essentially an off-white. For this exercise, you wouldn't use a blue, so you'd use either a yellow or a brown or a red or something like that, but just something to take away the white.
And Jackie's also said that could one follow this in acrylics? Oh, I think we've spoken about that before.
You could certainly try to achieve this in acrylics, but you would need to use extenders because acrylics, especially on a day like this, will just dry far too fast. And as we get into the main kind of area of the painting, as you'll see, and hopefully all the students will see, it's the ability to remove paint that becomes really important. This is the interesting part about the technique. It is a very different way of painting in oil. So working with acrylics, the risk that you run is the paint is simply just going to dry so fast, you're not going to have a chance to work through the piece. So if you've got extenders to slow the drying time down, yes. If you haven't, then really you're going to struggle massively to do this in acrylics unless you're super, super fast.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, so moving on. So whether you've got a tone canvas or not, and if you haven't got a tone canvas, you can still work on white. And it doesn't matter to what degree. This might be a bit darker than yours, this might be a bit lighter than yours, makes no difference. But the main thing to say is, clearly the crucial thing is it has to be completely bone dry. The reason we've put the tone on the canvas is twofold. One is to remove the white. Painting in oil onto a white canvas, or any white material at all, the white is generally too bright. And if we're trying to paint tonally, which is what this exercise is all about, placing colours down onto white, and exactly the same about having a white palette. It's never really a good idea to have a completely white palette. It's always better to have a colour that is darker or mid-tone or something like that. Some people even have their palette painted the same colour as the basic colour that they would ground their canvas, and that's very clever because when you're mixing your paint, you can see what it's going to look like when it's on the canvas. The second reason we're using the tone and the grounded canvas or the tone canvas is because this is going to come through the picture. Because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be applying the paint and then we're going to be removing it. So in a way, if anybody's worked, for instance, before with charcoal, you would put the charcoal on, you would maybe even grind it down or use a charcoal powder or a graphite powder or a pastel, and you'd be putting that in, but you could also remove that to create these really subtle shifts in terms of tone. So as I said, this is a really good exercise because we can do this alla prima, we can do this all in once. And as we work through the piece, we're going to work top to bottom and we're going to work in 3 distinct layers. I'm going to move the composition up a little bit from my practice piece actually to give a little bit of space at the bottom, because after we've done the exercise, I would like to think hopefully students will carry on and finish the piece based on how they want to finish off the piece at the bottom. If you're not sure, you could simply just darken that bottom down if you don't want to paint. You don't need to paint any kind of fancy foreground in there. But we're going to work down in those 3 layers. We're going to put the blue sky into the back first. We're going to then pull that out a little bit to represent the clouds. Then we're going to put the main cloud shapes in, and then we're going to put the shadows of those clouds in underneath.
And just a couple more questions, actually.
Sure.
I told you there'd be quite a few questions.
That's good. That's good.
So Liz has asked, she's got water-soluble oils. Will those work in the same way?
Yes, they will.
Perfect.
Yeah, they will. You won't have the same finish or the same texture, but water-soluble oils work in the same way, and that will be no problem at all. But definitely, once she's done that, I would encourage you, Liz, try it in oils, get some proper oil. And
Linda has said she loves your easel. Where is it from?
Oh goodness, this is my father's easel. So it's a Winsor & Newton. It's just a standard studio easel, but yeah, it's a good sturdy easel. And it rattles a little bit.
They don't make them like they used to.
They definitely don't make them quite like that. Well, you know, actually, these easels are still available. Different companies make them. Winsor & Newton make them. Trying to think of the French from a company that make easels. Completely gone on my head, but yeah, quite a few people make reasonably good studio easels, and I must admit it's great because it's extendable and I can put very, very large canvases on, or I can work really smooth.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so let's press on and start with the first part of the process. I'm going to swing the camera down to my palette so that you can see as I mix the paint. And the crucial thing to say, first of all, with this is that we're not going to work with white. We are only going to work with 3 colours. A brown, a blue, and essentially a red. A sienna is a red. And we're going to thin that paint right down. So for those of you that are used to working with oil paint very, very thickly, this is going to be completely different altogether. And as I said, the reason for doing that is because we're then going to move that paint around on the canvas. But also, this is an excellent way to paint quickly if you want to produce an underpainting. In fact, the piece that we paint today, you could potentially leave that, let that dry, and then if you wanted to, you could work over the top of that. Or I would maybe encourage you to repeat the exercise again and then use that as an underpainting for something else. And it's also a great way for sketching in oils as well, so that you can work very quickly, very fresh. And the great thing is the piece will dry quite rapidly, especially if it's warm weather and you're using liquid. So let me swing the camera down. I'll try and bring that down into position and you can tell me whether you've got a good enough view there. Hopefully that's okay.
Yep.
Excuse the bit of a mess everywhere, and I've still got some paint left on the palette, which I did mean to clean before today, but didn't get around to doing that. So I'm going to squeeze out my paint. I'm using Winsor & Newton Winton. It's a student grade paint, but it's still really good. There's nothing wrong with it. It's got good pigmentation. You can obviously go for Winsor & Newton artist grade paint, which is much more expensive. But for practice pieces like this, Winton is absolutely perfectly good enough. And I use big tubes, but you don't need to be using a huge amount. And that's another thing with this exercise, is that the volumes of paint that we use are really fairly small. I'm probably squeezing out a lot more than I need there, but it's always a good idea sometimes to have a bit more on your palette than you need. And there are ways of preserving oil paint once you've squeezed them out. You can put your palette into the fridge and you can chill it. You can cover it with cling film and cool it down. Theoretically, you can even freeze it, but I've never tried that and I'm not quite sure how risky that would be. And the other thing is, if you do cool your paint to preserve it, then you would need to leave it to warm up to room temperature before you then start using it again the next day or whenever you're ready. But these are my source elements of paint, so there's nothing extra in those, and I'm not going to mix those together, but rather I'm going to pull those into the mixing area that I'm going to work with. So essentially I'm going to try to not contaminate that paint. Again, just a slightly different way of working. So we're working with liquid.
We've got a question from it says John Scheid, but I don't know quite what their name is, but I'll bring you in now.
Yep.
And if you could just press unmute. Hello.
Hi, can you just go over the colours again, please? Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we've got raw umber, or you could use Van Dyke brown. We've got French ultramarine blue, just the standard ultramarine blue. And we've got burnt sienna. Again, you could use raw sienna or something else, but it's umber, ultramarine, and sienna.
Thank you. Hopefully that answered your question. Bye.
Thanks.
So we're using Liquin Original. And very quick point on this. For some people, it's a controversial product. Some artists will say, never use Liquin. It's not, it's not appropriate. You should always work with oil and spirit. I've worked with Liquin for years. It is archival quality as far as we're told it is. It's very stable. It's very reliable and consistent. It's horses for courses. Yes, you could do this exact same exercise using pure oil and spirit, and you could work between the two. The only thing I would say about that is you need more experience in learning about the process of fat over lean and making sure that when you're balancing out your oil versus your spirit, you know what you're getting and how thick and how solid your medium is going to be when you work with. Liquin takes all that out. Again, alkyd, you can use an alkyd medium. All this is really it's an accelerant, and it just speeds up the drying process of the paint. So I'm going to put a line of that down. Make sure you've given it a good shake if you've got your Liquin. I've already shaken this one a few times, so I'm just going to put a line of Liquin down. I'm putting a line down because that's quite useful then. If I put a blob down and I start mixing into it, I can contaminate it. So I've just recently started to use this approach of using a line of that. And I've got my painting knife or my palette knife. It doesn't matter how large it is or whether it's plastic or whatever, or even if you've just got a stick or something you can mix with, or a small knife would be fine. So to get the sky color, the first thing we're going to need to do is to obviously work with our blue, but we're not going to use just pure ultramarine blue because it's simply too hot. The color contains an enormous amount of red. Again, you could substitute this for cerulean blue. You could substitute it for Prussian blue. In fact, what we're going to do when we mix the ultramarine with the raw umber, we're going to pull those together, and that's going to give us almost something very, very close and similar to a Prussian blue. So all I'm going to do is take the volume of blue that I want, place that down into my mixing area. I'm going to take a much smaller volume of the brown, and hopefully you can see the proportion there. The proportion is probably 4/5 to a fifth, or maybe 3/4 to a quarter. I'm going to see as I go, as I mix that, and I'm going to balance that out and see what happens. And then I'm picking up my Liquin. I'm getting a fair volume at the moment. I'm just going to drop that in. And then I'm just going to start to bring those together and fold that together. So as I'm mixing it, because I'm mixing two very dark colors onto a darker palette, it's obviously quite hard to see what color I'm getting because I'm not using any white, so I'm not tinting that at all. But hopefully what you can see is as I do that, as I pull my blade through the paint, and certainly as I squeeze the paint off, I can start to see the color on the back of the blade.
I've just got a question from Julie. Julie, you just need to press unmute. Hello.
Hi, sorry to disrupt you. If we haven't got liquid, do we use, I've got linseed oil, or I've got distilled turpentine, or I've got white spirit. Would I use any of those to
you could use, yes, you could use any of those three. If you use the spirit, it's going to dry quite quickly, but I would probably, I would use a little bit of the turpentine and a little bit of oil. Maybe just a splash of turpentine and a couple of drops of oil mixed together. Because if it's warm where you are at the moment, what will happen is if you just use pure white spirit with oil, it will dry literally in sort of 20 minutes, 30 minutes.
Great, thanks very much.
Thanks, Julie. It's like a cooking show, isn't it? A couple of drops of this and a
exactly. Oil painting there is very much. It is, it's about learning recipes. In fact, when I'm teaching oil painting, I often say to people, the metaphors that often come out are around cooking and thinking about, flavors and hot and cold and textures, and certainly when it comes to mixing color as well. So hopefully on the palette there, you can see now, and that's quite a hot blue. I'm still quite hot at the hot end of the scale there, which means I had more ultramarine than the umber. So I'm going to just pinch a little bit more of the umber, just again, a tiny kind of spot there of umber on the tip of the blade. And I'm going to bring that all together. And as I'm mixing, what I'm always trying to do is to kind of bring, again, it's almost like mixing, pasta dough or bread flour. I'm trying to bring that together so I'm not making too much of a massive mess all over the palette. But what I want to do here is to try and get to a singular color. When you're mixing oil paints on a palette, and as you get more confident, more experienced, you can learn to sort of semi-mix and do part of the mixing on the canvas as you paint, which creates, lovely effects. So that's probably got us to roughly the color I want. And if I can just, I'm going to pop a little bit more medium in there, because what I really want to do is I want to show you how thin this paint is now. And what you should have, if you're using the same materials that I'm using here, is you should have a very, very thin, almost kind of glassy paint. And if I pick that up as a volume and hold it up towards the camera, I don't know how well you can see that. But it's, really is quite thin, and although it's still holding its shape, it's not running off the blade, but it's, it's very, very thin compared to the paint that comes out of the tube. So if everyone's got that, then what I'd like us to do is to then crack on with the first steps and see how we go. If your color is slightly off, or if it's a bit too blue or a bit too brown, really don't worry about it, because this is a tonal exercise. So it doesn't matter if you are a little bit off with your color. So let me just swing the camera back around again. And hopefully, John, you can tell me whether we've got to the right kind of position for that. Yeah. Are we good there? And another view there. Okay, so brushes, we're going to start from the top down. We're not going to sketch onto the board first. Sometimes you might get charcoal and mark out. If you wanted to do that, you could do that. But the exercise really is a lot quicker and freer than that. And this is where you want to grab your biggest brush. I think on the list we put on there a size 10. If you've got even anything bigger than that, that's fine. You could even get away with using a brush like this if you have it. That's quite handy as well. I use those a lot for putting volumes of paint down and getting skies in, but we've listed the size 10, so let's work with the size 10. And I'm going to load the brush with really quite a large volume of paint. Which camera are you using? John, using this one? Yeah, this one, okay. So a fairly large volume of paint on there. And we're going to start at the top and work our way down. I always start at the corner, so get the paint on, and it's going to look really dark, and that's fine. That's what we want. Get the paint onto the corners, work right to the edges of your panel, and you can see, and certainly if you're using a bristle brush, you're going to have a very scruffy kind of texture, and that's absolutely fine. Don't worry about that too much. If you're scrubbing your brush, that's fine, but scrub with the bristles, not against the bristles, so you don't damage your brush. And I have to apologise up front and say sorry for the clattering of the easel if it makes any noises as I'm doing this. And then be prepared to reach in and take plenty more paint as you need it, because the easiest thing for us to do is to get the thickest volume of paint to the top, and then we can pull that down. We're going to be pulling all this down both with a brush and with a bit of cloth or kitchen roll. So if you haven't got your kitchen roll or cloth or blue roll next to you, make sure you grab a piece of that, because you will need that as we work through. So I'm really not trying to create any smooth pattern. I'm simply in exactly the same way that I did to tone the canvas. I am just applying the dark blue at the top, and at the moment I'm putting in a good volume, and I can start to pull that down, because we're going to work that down into the canvas. And it is very dry here today. If you find your paint is too thick, then you can easily dip into your medium, and you can pull a little bit more paint and make it slightly thinner. And as long as you're giving it a good stir as you brush the medium into the paint, then it will mix. That's a crucial thing with liquid. You have to remember that you have to make sure it's mixed through the paint. Otherwise, what you'll have is you'll have certain areas of the paint drying faster than others, and that can lead to stretching and cracking and all sorts of things. And I want to be coming down to about here, so I'm putting plenty on. And while I do this, I can ask if there are any questions at this point, because we're all going through the same exercise, part of the exercise at the moment.
All is quiet.
All is quiet. They're all busy beavering away. That's good. Now you'll start to see already, and this is the interesting part, is because we're using this blue, which is the ultramarine plus the umber, we're using that mixed together to create a darker, more sort of almost a Prussian blue. And we're using it over the yellow ochre ground, which is a lovely golden colour. I mean, yellow ochre is a classical colour to ground your canvas or tone your canvas for landscape paintings. And even when the painting is complete and you see none of the yellow ochre at all, you don't get any of it showing through, it still lends a slight creaminess to your skies when you're painting skies. But because we're putting this over the yellow, the blue, I can see, maybe you can see with the cameras, if you're not, you'll probably see on your own canvas, is it slightly green now? It has a slightly greenish tinge, almost as if we're going for that kind of duck egg tinge, which is quite nice. So as I've worked my way through that sort of top quarter, I can really now just start to bring that paint in, and it doesn't matter how scruffy it is, because all this is mobile. We can move all this around as we paint. As I've said, on a warm day like this, you're going to find it's going to dry quite quickly. But essentially, if you keep working it, you'll be absolutely fine. Oil paint, out of interest, as I've mentioned to people before as I teach, it's important to remember that oil paint dries through oxidization and not evaporation. So a lot of people think about putting a painting somewhere warm and airy because they want the paint to evaporate, as it would if it was a watercolor or an acrylic. But oil paint actually needs oxygen for it to bond, for it to dry, and for the paint to change its consistency. And that's about as far as I'm going to go with the brush. And now what I'm going to do is to pick up a piece of blue roll or kitchen roll, or even better if you've got it, sort of a soft lint-free cloth is good, because you will pick up bits on the canvas otherwise. And I'm just going to get a folded piece of that, and I'm just going to sort of wipe that down. And again, in some ways, I'm almost just staining the canvas as we did at the beginning. I'm using downward strokes first because I want to pull the main element paint down into the canvas. And once I start to even that out a little bit, now I can use some horizontal strokes, and I can start to pull that down. If you get a few lines on it, then that's absolutely fine. Pick up your brush, and you can just come in and start to fiddle and move that around a bit. And we could go back and we can add some texture to the sky. But this is really, all this bit is this is just simply the setting behind which we're going to then add everything else onto. And I know it looks, as I say, very scruffy, very loose, and that's exactly what I want. This is where you can be completely free to decide how you want to finish that off. And that's going to be about as far as I'm going to go for now.
Now, believe it or not, we're sort of nearing halfway. But when would you think is a good halfway point for us to take a little stop?
I would like to see us get the next bit in.
Okay, perfect.
And then we can get the shapes in, we can work our way down from there.
Okay.
So you can see I've left a little bit of a curve, and already I've started to create sort of some lumpiness, which might emphasize or suggest the edges of clouds. And now I can do what I want to do, which is to take a clean piece of cloth and just to wipe away. And if I put my finger into the cloth, fingers are a great shape. They're the same as the tip of a filbert brush. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to mark away and rub away some of that. It's also softening and helping me to blend it. But I'm trying to simply remove some of the paint. I have to keep switching over. You can use just a gathered piece of kitchen roll. And we're using it almost as if anybody has done their formal drawing lessons and you've used a stump before, a stub just to mark things out. And all I'm trying to do is just pull some of that paint off. So I'm creating something that's very, very light in the background, or lighter in the background, but we're going to remove more of that as we go. And as I say, if you've got any unsightly lines or anything, you can just simply wipe like that. Okay, and that's as far as we need to go for that. You will want to just wipe your brush out now with a bit of kitchen roll or blue roll. Just squeeze the brush out. Don't wash it in spirit. You're using the same brush, so hopefully you haven't nobody rinsed their brush out. Don't rinse your brush in spirit, because if you do that, you'll need to pick up a totally different brush. Okay, so now let's go back to the palette and let's look at how we're going to mix our next color. And if you haven't got as far as I have in terms of finishing your background, that's absolutely fine. We'll just slow things down a little bit, and you can listen as I explain how the next stage works. So we've got some blue already on the palette here, and we're going to be using the sienna next. It's important to get rid of as much of that paint as possible, but you don't, again, have to be fanatical about it. This is another nice thing we're working with oil paint, is sometimes we want to harmonize the colors a little bit. We don't always want to have a perfect red, a perfect yellow, a perfect blue, but rather we want to have those colors start to harmonize and work together. So I'm picking a volume of my raw umber, and for this size of canvas, I suppose that's, I don't know, a large fat pea's worth or a bean's worth of paint, maybe a bit more. But we don't need to have a huge amount because we're going to be thinning it down. We're going to be thinning it right down. So again, I'm picking up some medium. You can see there's some blue in there, and that's absolutely fine. And I'm going to start to thin that sienna down with the medium and go back to the same consistency I had before, and keeping that fairly thin. And that's what I'm getting to. Now you can see at the moment that that's going to be far too hot as a color and far too bright as a color. So now what I'm going to do is to pull some of my blue across and just start to work that in so that I have, not all the way through, but just so I've got a little bit of a shade or a tonal shift or a color shift, really. It's a hue shift between that. And I'm keeping some of that brighter, more raw sienna into the center of my mix. Okay, so hopefully everyone's got that. So we're working quickly. We're trying to work fairly rapidly. This is also a very good method to work if you're working outdoors. If you're an artist that likes to paint en plein air, it's an exercise that you could do if you were trying to sketch things. Bear in mind, painting always makes me laugh. People say when you go outside and paint clouds and oils. You can, but clouds move very, very rapidly. So you've got to have a method and a technology, a technique that can allow you to paint fast, so you can get those shapes out and onto the canvas and really just sort of build that as a sketch. So we are now going to work across, and we're going to be looking at probably the bottom third now, and we're going to build some cloud shapes as we go across, and we're going to be putting that paint in. Now, the first thing to say, which is really important, is don't panic, because I know this is going to look incredibly dark. You're going to see the paint going on in a very, very thick way, and I'm using the darker paint first. I'm working from my reference. This is where it gets a bit noisy, but you can see that what I'm doing is I'm pushing, and I'm sort of pushing and twisting the brush. I'm holding the brush between my finger and thumb. Don't hold your paintbrushes this way. It's incredibly difficult to paint holding the brush like a pencil. You want to hold it as far down the handle as you possibly can. And then as you push the paint in, we're kind of pressing it into the canvas. And as I say, I'm starting to create some shapes that go across the canvas. And I'm putting those darker colors that I've mixed a little bit further back in the piece. And then I'm just sort of pushing it down, getting it a twist. And what I'm trying to create with these shapes, this very much is designed to sort of represent, if you know, and we've had some great skies over the past week or so. I hasten to add, I think we've got some fantastic ones coming up soon as well. Late in July, we normally get some great storms. But if you see the skies late in a summer's afternoon, perhaps after a storm, you get various bands of cloud, and you get those bands of cloud that sit on the horizon, often in a bluey kind of haze. And as the sun goes down, that haze gets very pink, and you get this lovely, fabulous kind of rich, creamy texture in the background. And that's what we're trying to emulate here. So I'm just working around. And these are dots. I mean, that's what they are. They really are just dots of paint. Don't try and overthink it. I've got a certain shape that I'm trying to work to. And I'm thinking about the layers that I'm trying to create. So I want another layer here as I push that paint down. This is where experience and knowing good cloud shapes comes in, and studying clouds. It's one of the things, funnily enough, a lot of students I work with often say to me that since they started learning to paint clouds, they spend most of their time now looking at the sky and enjoying what they're seeing, and hopefully making some memories or some sketches, or just grabbing photographs. You know, that's another thing. Don't be shy about grabbing your camera when you see a good sky. It's important to get references as you can. There's nothing wrong with working from photographs. There's some people have different opinions on that, but as long as you don't work slavishly to a photograph, photographs are just really for the suggestion more than anything. Okay, so hopefully you can see what I've created there in terms of these patterns. They are blobs, they sit together. The darker ones to the top, the lighter ones are slightly lower down. And now I'm going to reach back into the darker paint, and I'm going to put dark over the lighter color. As I said, this is where this technique is much different. It's completely opposite to the standard oil painting technique of working from dark to light. But you will see in a moment how we do that, because we do that by removing the paint. So I'm pushing my dark shapes right down. You might need to angle your arm, just to tilt your arm to move it around. As I say, this is why using a filbert is better, because a filbert has a rounded brush tip, or they used to before they get worn out, and that gives you the ability to create more natural shapes and curves, whereas a square tipped brush is quite different. You can create some lovely effects with a bright or a flat, but when we're working with clouds, I certainly prefer to work with a filbert. Okay, and I'm going back into the darker paint that I've got now, so I'm pretty much using all the paint I've got left on my palette. As I say, if you're struggling to keep up with this, or if you're trying to figure out how it's working, then that's absolutely fine, because the idea really is that you'll be able to continue working on this piece after you finish the session, and you can play around with it. The crucial thing is for you to kind of see the technique and see how it works. Okay. So from there, we can now put our large brush down. Now that's got us sort of halfway, John, if you want to
Okay, great.
cut in at that point.
Yeah, no problem. So the reason for this half-term break obviously, last week we all painted a beautiful watercolour dandelion with Jane Bettridge. We'll take a look at those and announce a winner towards the end of this class. But for now, I wanted Nial to explain a little bit about what he intends to do through his private workshop, which will be the 2-3 hour private workshop on the 3rd of July. It's Friday. I think it's much more detailed and in-depth study of clouds, I believe. Is that right, Nial?
Yes. So, I mean, this is a very good exercise in terms of building shapes and how we're going to start to get to tones. What we're going to be doing in the main lesson is we're going to be painting and going through the classical kind of Dutch style skies. So working quite fresh, working with the same colours, but obviously we're going to be using white. So we are going to be placing the paint down onto the canvas using different textures. And we're going to work purely tonally, and we're going to start to build some darker foregrounds, but really mainly a concentration on the sky, and then start to build up some of these textures. But learning how to produce the essence of light. I am a tonalist. I paint to the tonal method, and I think for most people, and certainly who get involved in oils, they realise that's where oils really come to life, is to have that ability to develop those contrasts of light and dark. And that's, I guess, what oil is really well known for. Certainly going back to the great masters, Constable Turner and people like that. So that's the basis of the piece that we're going to work on. Hopefully within a 3-hour session, I'm going to show you how to paint it.
Wow, that looks amazing. And this won't need a toned canvas to start with, will it? Will it be on a blank canvas?
This can be done on a completely white canvas, or it can be done on a toned canvas. It will make a difference. But if people don't have a toned canvas and they just want to work straight onto white, this was done straight onto white, and that's absolutely fine. Yeah,
it looks amazing. That. No, I'm really excited about that one. That sounds really good. So what I'll do in the chat is I'll put a link to. You can obviously see this on the Arty classes part of shopkeeparty.com, and you can go through. It goes to Nial's shop, and you can purchase. Obviously, it's a paid-for workshop, but it should be I'll put the link in the chat as well, so you can go directly. So if you're interested in taking your oil painting to the next level, Nial's been I think you'll learn loads of things. Nial really knows his stuff, so it's a very good. I think it's going to be a very good session. I've got Rishi who wants to ask a question. Hello, Rishi. Do you want to unmute?
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Rishi.
I just had a question. I mean, like, would you be able to do what you're doing with oil paint with acrylic?
You could try it, but as I said earlier on in the call, the difficulty you're going to have is acrylic is going to dry so fast. If this was acrylic now, I would be panicking, because within a few minutes this is going to dry to a point that we're not going to be able to move it, especially in a warm day. So acrylics, you can use the same technique, but you'd need to work very quickly, or you'd certainly need to use extenders, which slow the drying time of acrylics right down.
Okay.
Problem with acrylics, they dry very, very fast. They're very good for putting in very fine detail. They're good for blending and so on, but they dry rapidly. The benefit of working with an oil paint is an oil paint dries a lot slower and is more mobile, and you can work with it a lot longer, and you can build the effects, which is what we're going to start doing next.
Yeah, I used to have oil paints, but then the my brushes used to get messed up because I didn't know how to use the brushes. So then
learning to clean your brushes. Yeah, learning to clean your brushes is the crucial thing. Trust me, it's worth it in the long run. It's worth the effort in the long run. Once you start working with oils and understand how to work with them, you won't want to go back, in my humble opinion.
Okay.
Thanks, Rishi. Bye.
Okay.
And we've also got Linda. Hi, Linda. You'll find yourself muted initially. There you go. Perfect.
Hello. My question is, what did you actually do to the canvas before you started? It looked like it was raw sienna, but it's particularly bright. Did you add something to it?
The canvas was toned. It's toned in a yellow ochre.
There was actually, Linda, a sort of a class prep video that was on our Shopkeep Arty that showed you how to tone your canvas beforehand. So if you want to repeat this and go back and do this at a later date, because we're going to put this video on YouTube, it's already live streaming on YouTube now. You can watch that prep video, and it shows you how to tone the canvas, and Nial goes through it. It's very simple and very quick. It's 5 to 10 minutes.
Thank you very much.
That's what gives you and you needed to do that beforehand because it needs to be dry.
Oh, right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, if you haven't got a toned canvas, this exercise will still work. It'll just be that it will be very, very white. Obviously, the canvas will be white underneath.
Yeah.
So this is now where we move to the next stage where we're going to grab a smaller brush. I'm using a brush.
Sorry, Neil, I've got still a few more people wanting to ask a question. So Sasha, who was having problems with hearing us earlier. Hello, Sasha,
Okay.
can you hear us now?
Hello.
Hello.
Sorry, I'm not sure if you answered this question before because I had to come off the meeting and get back on because of their hearing.
Okay.
Me hearing it. And so I was wondering, because I don't have any oil paints, but I do have watercolor and it doesn't dry very quickly. So I was wondering if you could use that.
No, unfortunately, you wouldn't be able, Sasha, you wouldn't be able to use this technique in watercolor because once the water and the pigment hits the paint absorbs it. Watercolor is a really hardening. I think probably the most skillful and advanced medium there is, because once the watercolor, it's just like pen and ink. Once it's on the paper, you can't remove it. This is why oil paint gives a completely different set of options, which allows us to start to remove paint and to move that paint around on the canvas, which is what I'm going to demonstrate. So you wouldn't be able to do this in oil. You could possibly in watercolor. You could possibly try it in acrylic, as I said, if you've got something to slow the acrylics down a bit. But this is an oil painting lesson. So
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry about that, Sasha. If you really enjoy what you're seeing today and you think, oh, that looks brilliant, maybe you can persuade your mum and dad to invest in a few oil paints for you.
Yeah.
and
That'd be helpful.
And you only need three tubes of paint and a bottle of medium and a brush, and then you're off and running. Talking of which, okay, let's press on, everyone. I want to press on, John, because the paint is going to start to dry.
No problem. Okay.
Yeah. So as you can see, it looks a mess, and that's great. And they always say in great art, it starts off looking scruffy, then you're going in the right direction, because that means you're working nice and loose and light. And what we're trying to do with oil painting, I think oil painting is much more textural. It's more three-dimensional. It's almost like working with clay, and you're molding it and shifting it and moving elements around. And for me, that's what's interesting in how to work with oil as a medium. And in this case, as I say, what we're doing now is we're going to take these blobs of paint, we're going to carve them and shape them into clouds. And we're going to do that with our brush, with our filbert brush. As I said, I've got a size 6. And I'm going to do that by just starting to blend in, but with the tip of my brush, just very gently, in fact, almost just tapping. I'm going to work on the right-hand side first, so you can see where I'm trying to build this up. And I'm just going to start to tap. And because the paint, and even the fact that we just left the paint onto the canvas for a few minutes as we were speaking, it's already starting to stain the canvas. So what I'm getting is I'm getting areas of more solid paint and more areas of more diffuse, softer paint. And what I'm trying to do as I build this up, and you'll notice as well, I'm using my paper towel. I should have mentioned that perhaps. You need to keep a piece of cloth in your left hand, or your other hand, I should say. And whether I pull the paint off or whether I just dab the paint and then clean the brush. So as I return the brush back to the panel, back to the canvas, I'm lifting. That's what I'm doing. I'm actually now taking the paint back off the canvas, which is, as I said, this is why this is a very, very different method. It's a deconstruction, almost in the same way, as I said, is if you were using charcoal and you put the charcoal or the graphite or the chalk or the pastel, almost as if you put that onto the paper and then you started to remove that with an eraser or a piece of bread or whatever, however you choose to work in that medium. Now I'm trying to leave those slightly harder shapes, and as I work my way down into the dark paint, that is there to represent, the shadows underneath the cloud, because we need to make sure this cloud has an effect that it rolls. We want it to have this three-dimensional effect. And the key thing, which again I need to mention quite early on, is that in this instance, the light is coming down. It's coming down from the top. So whether the light is reflecting off clouds further above, and we've left this quite scruffy deliberately at the top, but the light is coming down. So think about the shapes of those clouds. If I've got a shape here, then the light is going to fall on this top of the cloud, which means I need to remove some of the paint from that area. So I'm starting to work down, and I can see the actual canvas itself. I can see I'm looking through it, but because I've left the paint on there, it's left a mark, it's left a stain. And the other thing you'll notice as well is as you move the paint around the canvas, as you push it especially, because the brush is not highly absorbent and it doesn't pull all of the paint off and suck it into the brush, it kind of pushes the paint around. I thought about this the other day, how on earth I would describe it. It's like pushing gravy around the plate. And as you move it, what happens is you start to create these little rings or little rims. I don't know if you can see it at all there, because all I'm doing, and if I do it this side, I'm wiping out the center of that shape. And then I'm coming in and I'm forming another shape close by, and another shape, and I'm twisting and just pulling the paint off. And when I've done enough of that, I can go back to just softening. So areas that I want to simply soften, I can tap. But I'm moving the paint and taking the paint off mostly from the top of the cloud form that I'm trying to shape, that I'm trying to build. And we're going to do that in an even more extreme way in a moment when we start to use liquid. We're going to actually use liquid in a very, very different way. So where I've got these gaps now, where I've got this very sort of these scruffy gaps down underneath, I'm just going to start tapping in just to blend those gaps in, because I don't want to see any of the clear yellow ochre of the canvas underneath. So I'm just going through and I'm just gently dabbling my brush, just dabbling it across the surface, breaking those shapes up and starting to soften them now into something that's starting to resemble a cloud. And let's be honest, when we paint clouds, we need things to be very nice and soft, because they are nothing more than steam. They're just water vapor. They're not physical, hard, solid objects. Well, they're physical, but obviously not hard, solid objects. And hopefully you can see that as I'm doing that, I'm building that three-dimensional effect. I'm leaving some shadows. I'm leaving some shadow areas. So if I've got light falling on this point here, then I want the shadow underneath that. And then I'm going to pull in some brighter areas just by starting to work that down. In fact, what I can do, using the same brush, go reaching back to my palette. If I've got any of the dark paint left on my palette, I can always pick some more paint up. So I'm going to put a shadow back in this instance. I'm going to put that shadow in there. And then I'm going to soften the top of it. And this is what I said before at the beginning. This is how you can use oil almost in a way where you can mold and sketch it, just as if it were almost as if it were clay or a three-dimensional material, not just simply a two-dimensional image on a flat plane. So just start to pull that off. And we're working from dark to light, because the paint that exists on the canvas at the moment is the darkest. This is why, as I said, at the beginning, you may look at it with horror and think, wow, it's just way too dark. I can honestly say probably the number one mistake that beginners make in oil paint is they simply do not paint dark enough. And even if you're looking at very soft, diffuse, ethereal images, the thing with oil paint is you have to remember to create the element of light. And this is where Turner was the absolute the master of it, without a shadow of a doubt. The ultimate was he was able to create an essence of light by using dark. And it's the dark elements within a Turner that really help to make the light sing. If you want an area of your painting to look lighter, then you have to put something darker next to it or near to it. So I'm just tapping my way down, but I'm trying to build those shapes. And don't over fiddle with the top, and don't run everything into one shape. The other thing you'll also find with oil painting when it comes to clouds is, or in any method, actually, any technique, is it's very, very easy to suddenly look at your piece and realize you've fallen into a habit of creating symmetry. So if you look here, I've done it already. I've actually started to make my painting quite symmetrical. And that's just a human instinct to do that. Our brains look for symmetry. And when you're painting, I was going to say subconsciously, but you're painting more freely. You're not straining your brain too much. You're just enjoying the process. It can be quite often the case that you suddenly look at a painting, realize that you've actually started to create symmetry or rhythm or pattern. And we need to break that. So I'm going to break that by making this shape larger here. So I'm going to reach down into my sienna, and I'm going to put a bigger blob right on here.
Now, Niall, we've had Roberta with her hand up for quite a while. So do you feel brave enough to answer while working?
Yeah, absolutely. Fire away.
There you go, Roberta. You've whether your question's still valid, I don't know, but you're on mute at the moment.
I didn't. Hi. I didn't join till very late, early hours this morning, so I underpainted in acrylic. Would you ever underpaint in acrylic yourself?
I personally don't, and that's not any kind of prejudice against acrylic. It's just that I was always taught to work in oils, and for me, it's just the chosen medium. I'll confess, have dabbled once or twice purely for the benefit of my daughter when she did art at school, and I have to be honest, I really didn't like it. I just found it just, for me, it just dries too fast. As I said, it's acrylic is a fabulous medium. There are some amazing artists that work in acrylic and produce stunning work, but it's a different medium. It just doesn't have the same handling properties as oil.
It's just that I didn't have the 24 hours to leave the canvas.
Yeah, no, and that's fine. I mean, that's what I'm suggesting is an ideal scenario. If you've got the time to have that to tone your canvas, then you're going to get a better effect. But hopefully, I mean, the exercise, and as I say, if you worked really quickly with acrylic, you could actually produce something fairly similar. It's just that it's just the drying speed is so much faster than oil. It can cause real problems when you then start to try to move the paint around.
I don't paint in acrylic, actually. I try not to.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hopefully that's helpful, Roberta. Sorry about taking so long to come to your question.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, so as you can see now, I'm pulling that down again, and I keep doing this. I keep moving it, wiping it, and eventually your cloth's going to get fairly dirty, so you'll need to move that up. And now the next thing to say is that I'm going to show you how we can use the medium itself to remove the paint even more. So if I take what are the lightest areas, and for me in this painting, the lightest areas will have to be obviously towards the top. So I'm going to look at this area here, and I'm going to look at this area here. So by using a clean brush, and this is the right camera shot, John?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now having wiped my brush clean, what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip that into the raw liquid. There's no paint. I'm not using the paint. And I'm just going to squeeze the raw liquid out on the table or the palette, and you'll see that will pull some paint out. It'll kind of almost wash your brush in the medium, but I've now almost basically got no pigment at all, and that allows me, if I use the medium, because the liquid will dissolve the paint underneath. And this is the crucial thing about working with liquid, is you need to make sure that each layer, if you're working in a layered method, you need to make sure that your paint is fully dry before you go in to use it again, because if your painting is slightly wet, what will happen is that the liquid will dissolve, just like a turpentine would. It will dissolve the paint that's already on the palette. On the canvas. So again, just small amounts of that, and you can't even see it because the brush is basically just dampened with liquid. But you'll find, and you don't need to push hard. Anyone who's doing this now will see. You can just literally dissolve a little bit of that paint, and then again, as you lift the paint off the canvas onto the brush, you can then start to remove it.
Yes, we did a session a few weeks ago with oil and bleach, and the bleach, I guess, would act in a similar sort of way to the liquid with the oil.
Yeah, I mean, I have to confess, I've never heard of that in my life, but yeah, I guess it would probably have the same effect. I mean, it's obviously that's what it's doing. It's just disturbing the oil, dissolving the oil, in some way, and then removing it. This is where oil, I mean, there are so many things you can do with oil. It's, there are so many different things you can do in terms of working with it as a medium. You can keep the oil extremely thick. You can work with it very thin. This is the thing. Turner, people look at Turner's work, and yes, without a shadow of doubt, he's clearly the biggest inspiration I've ever had in my life in terms of the style of his tonalism. He really painted oils almost as if they were watercolors. He painted incredibly thinly. There seems to be a notion these days that when you paint in oils, everything has to be thick, and everything done in impasto. And certainly in terms of the way I was taught, my father said, the impasto comes in where it's needed. Don't paint the entire thing in thick, heavy paint, because you're using the impasto to create effect. And if you're trying to do that across the whole piece, well, you're not really giving that effect a chance for it to sort of take center stage. So this bottom band here, I can really now start to find areas that I want to lighten And that's what I'm doing. I mean, because we didn't sketch this out and we did this really quite randomly, you've got to trust your instinct in the fact that your shapes that you're making, you can move and you can mold around. So, and one thing I haven't done for the purposes, obviously, of the demonstration is I haven't stepped back. And any of the students I have that are watching this will know, they'll say, Neil, why are you not stepping back? I'm always banging on at people and saying, make sure you take a step back and look at your work from a distance. So if you haven't done that at the moment, now is the time. Let's just all take a step back at least.
That's like in the restaurant field, tasting your food as you're cooking.
It's really important. There's a place for painting and a place for seeing, and they're not the same place. That's why I always teach painting standing, because I appreciate some people can't stand all the time when they're painting, you know, for various reasons. They may find it's just too difficult for them. But you really do, if you can, you want to try to paint always standing. Apart from anything else, it's pretty good exercise. But it encourages you to step back. If you're sitting down all the time, there is a big risk that what will happen is you'll just get glued to the canvas, your nose off the top of the canvas. And before you know it, when you do get up and step back and look at it, you suddenly notice with horror something that you've got completely wrong, or your perspective's wrong, or your tones are wrong, or your color, whatever, which you just simply couldn't see because of where you were.
Now, I don't know whether you remember Rishi asking the question because she didn't have any oils, but she said, could you use oil pastel with acrylic, as I have those?
I have no idea how you would mix oil pastel with acrylic. You could do the exercise in oil pastel, and then you could scrape the pastel away. Just forget the acrylic for the moment. You could work as a sketch with oil pastel. You could put the oil down. It's a bit like the old exercise as a child. You must remember where we used to put stripes of color onto a piece of paper in crayon, and then paint it black, and then scrape away the paint to leave the color underneath. You know, that's essentially what we're doing, the technique we're doing. So if it was an oil pastel, you could definitely do it that way, and sort of pull it back off. But as I say, the problem with acrylic is that once the acrylic is fixed to the paper or the canvas and it's dry, it's dry. You know, you can maybe try to dissolve it to get it back off again, but this is all incredibly wet. You know, if I were to put a mark on it, you can see how wet that is, and that paint will stay that way for really some time. And that's where oil paint. The problem with oil paint is a lot of people think that it's in a very advanced medium. It's very technical. Therefore it's very difficult. Oil paint, I'm going to give you the secret. Oil paint is actually one of the easier mediums to work in when you understand it. When you understand its properties, you know, we all had to learn. That's what benefit I had was I was taught by my father, and he explained it to me. Once I understood it, I then started to realise how I could work with oil. And certainly more latterly in my life, as I've come back into oil painting, I've definitely had the benefit of understanding how flexible it is as a medium. So you can see what I'm doing here at the moment. And again, even if it's with a finger, I can just take a little bit of that paint off. You know, some people love to get their fingers in when they paint and actually paint with their hands, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. You know, again, just like working with a pastel where you can smudge. Where I've got little shadows here, I can smudge those shapes, or I can put my finger in and twist the shape and just pull that off. And what I'm doing as I'm removing the paint, as I'm lifting it, is I'm getting it lighter and lighter and lighter, because I'm going further and further down through the paint that we added, and I'm taking it off, and that's what's creating that tonal reference. Can you see that okay? Is that coming out okay on the image?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. I mean, perhaps this area here is a good example of that.
Yeah.
And then this layer of cloud in the background, again, the same thing. You could use the same brush. Be a little bit careful if I'm using the same brush, because if I start to work this into the sky now and just use that to blend, it will start to tone that. If I'm going to do that, I need to tone it closer down to the base, but don't blend everything out. That's definitely, as I say, one of the big challenges with oil painting is when you start to learn how subtly you can tone things, people then suddenly rush into blending everything out, and unfortunately that leaves a lot of the value of the material out, because you're not creating those harder, sharper edges. So I'm just playing with this now, putting a little bit of liquid on my finger. You could put a little bit of, I'm just literally touching the liquid on my finger, rubbing it off on the glass, so my finger is nothing more than just slightly damp. And can you see as I do that, it starts to pull the paint. And this is why working with canvas is better. And the rougher the tooth of the canvas, the more effective it would be. You can't see it probably through the camera, but what's happening is as I move that, I'm taking the paint off the surface of the weave of the canvas, especially if I keep my finger flat. And what's happening is I'm wiping the paint off the surface of the tooth of the canvas, but the paint that's gone into the holes of the canvas, into the hollows of the weave of the canvas, is staying there and staining and creating quite a nice extra effect. That's just by using the tip of my finger, putting it in and twisting it and twisting those shapes. So coming back to the brush, I'm just going to work my way down a little bit more now. And hopefully, as we've gone through the exercise, and as you're starting to work, you will see how you can build these shapes. I kept this side a little bit darker deliberately because the light for me is coming from the top left. And if you want to build shadow back in again, if you feel you've taken too much shadow out, then you can simply return to the paint while this is all mobile, while it's still wet. I can return to the paint and I can reset shadows. So here now we're going from light to dark. We're resetting those shadows with the tip of the brush. And we could continue doing this. If this is winter, and certainly if it's in my studio in the winter, this painting would be would be wet for at least 2 or 3 hours, and workable for at least 2 or 3 hours, if not longer. On a day like today, certainly once the air gets to it, the fresh air gets to it, you'll find that probably by tomorrow this will be dry. So I hope that has given you something to play with and work with.
Yeah, that looks great. That does.
Just explore, just explore the idea. Well, the thing is, John, I wanted to do something different for this session because, I'm not going to mention his name, but I didn't want it to just be, painting mountains and trees and nice happy clouds, which is all great. But I wanted to try and give an example of how you can work with oil in a different way. And yes, now you can see it's very contrasty. Also, the other point to say, as a very darker, much darker contrasty piece. And if you compare what I did previously to this, you can see the two are, I suppose, they're not too bad. The blue's slightly different. This canvas was slightly more yellow, actually. But once you've got the shape in, that could be left to dry. And then what you can do is you can soften all of this, leave it to fully dry for 2 or 3 days or even a week, ideally, and then come back to it. And then what you could do is you could then go over with something like a zinc white. And you could soften, you could scumble and soften everything out. And you could almost use this as if it were just purely an underpainting. But this is a really good way to work on building your compositions, but most importantly, to work on your tones. And the one last point to mention about that, one thing I say to students all the time, again, those that have been to visit me in the studio or been on my courses will know, use your phone, pick up your phone, switch your phone camera into black and white, and then look at the lens, look at the screen of the phone and look at the image that you've painted through your phone in mono, or take a photograph of it and convert it into mono, and then turn away and look at it. And if you look at it in black and white, you are then stripping away all color, and that gives you the ability to concentrate on your tonal values. Yeah, and that's so important. Frequently, and if I'm working with, if I've been to the coast, I've been up to Burnham and I've taken some good photographs, when I bring those back to work them up as pieces to produce a painting from, I will frequently take those images, duplicate them, and then convert them to black and white and use the black and white version when I start the painting. Because I'm not always necessarily trying to paint the exact colors that I see through the lens of the camera. Remember, oil painting is not slow photography. We're trying to create an impression of something, a mood, a feeling, a sensation. If we're trying to paint something that looks like a photograph, just use a camera.
Yeah.
Hyperrealism is a fantastic discipline, and it's amazing to admire the skill and the technique of it. But for me, oil painting is really much more about creating a feeling.
Yeah. No, that was a fantastic session, that, Niall. Thank you so much for your time on that.
Pleasure.
And we've already had someone texted to say they'd already made an order for your workshop.
Okay.
So that's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to that one.
Well, it'll be good fun, and it'll be something that we can work through. And by the end of it, we'll have a nice fresh piece.
Yeah, exactly. A mini masterpiece, as I keep calling it. Fantastic. Something that you can then just go and hang on your wall. So once you've finished today's clouds, simple clouds on a canvas or whatever you're painting it on, please do take a photo of it and send it to us, because we'd love to put it on our little blog post. You can either put it as a picture on Facebook, and if you do hashtag ShopKeepArty or the little @ShopKeepArty and link it to us so that we can find it, we can then post it on there. Or alternatively, if you send it on email, you can send it to arty@shopkeepeasy.com, and then we'll invite Nial back next Tuesday, so a week today, to announce the winner, which one he feels.
Oh, I see, right, okay, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
And sorry, John, I was just going to say, yeah, a couple of very quick things. So when you finish, do remember to clean your brushes out thoroughly. If you leave liquid in your brushes, they'll be in the bin in 2 days' time. So just make sure you get some white spirit and do clean those out. And I was going to say as well, John, if anybody's got any questions about this and they want to contact me, reach out to me through social media. You'll find me on Instagram, Facebook, wherever. nialadams.com is a good place to start, but reach out to me. And if you've got a question, ping it through to me, or if you'd like me to, what I'll probably do is I'll upload this image as well to my Instagram account, so it'll be there so people can see it and they can use it as a.
We've got Diane actually wants to ask a question. Diane, you're on mute.
Oh, hi. Nial, I've just painted this and enjoyed it very, very much. I've made the mistake of I'm using MDF board, which I've discovered is absolutely of no use whatsoever for oil paint. So
Yeah.
this has been a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, no, I mean, MDF is a material a lot of people use. The only thing is, obviously, it has no tooth. It's completely smooth.
Yeah.
So, I mean, hence the reason why I recommend a canvas panel. I mean, they're typically just wrapped onto cardboard. But if you use MDF, the best thing you can do, get some gesso or even some household paint if you really need to. Put some grit in it, some dirt, some sand. People use polyfiller. And put something down onto the hardboard or onto the MDF, so you're giving it some grip. I mean, literally, I've seen people just pick up dirt. I mean, I did it. When I was in China, I had a canvas that was so smooth and silky that had no tooth at all. And I went outside out to the academy, went to the edge there. They got some strange looks from the locals, and I was picking up handfuls of dirt, bringing it back, and then rubbing it into the canvas to grind the canvas to try and get some sort of tooth. But yeah, you'll struggle with completely smooth MDF. You really need.
Yeah, I sure did. But anyway, I enjoyed it.
Great, good to hear it, Dan. It's all about a learning experience anyway.
It is, isn't it?
Thank you. Right, so I promised that we would actually have a look at last week's submissions on the watercolour dandelion, and it was a really great session. So let me just share my screen with you. There we go. And if we just go to the blog, the Arty classes, got some new ones on here now as well that you can have a look up that are up and coming, so you can register for those. And this is with Jane Bettridge, and in fact I'll get Jane on in a minute, but yeah, we had some fantastic dandelions sent in to us, lots and lots of different interpretations of the dandelion. Definitely urge you to go and have a look at the blog and have a look at all the different dandelions that are sent into us. It really does go on for a while. That wasn't quite a dandelion, but we were getting into, I think that was from, yeah, Julie sent us 3 pictures. She got a little bit carried away there, but looked really lovely. Lots of different flowers there. June sent us one on an inverse background as well, so that was interesting. Anyway, have a look at that. It was really fantastic. Jane, I will now invite you in so that you can say a few words. Jane. There we go. Hopefully you're there. There we go. You just have to unmute and yeah, and just press unmute. Perfect. How are you, Jane?
I'm fine, thank you. Hello, everyone. What a lovely demo. Really enjoyed it. I don't paint in oils, but I did enjoy watching that. It's made me enthusiastic to try. Yeah, okay. What an amazing array of dandelions. It was so difficult for me to choose because there was just so many really, really exceptional pieces of work this week. And one that stood out especially was from James McGuinness, age 9. He did a lovely little dandelion, and Sasha and Rishi did, Sasha did a cat and a butterfly on hers, and Rishi did some ladybirds. Absolutely lovely, like how you used your imagination and took it a step further. And you know, honestly, they were so good. It was really difficult for me. I think this has been the most difficult one for me to choose. So one stood out, an exceptional painting, and that was Julie Pierce. A dandelion was absolutely perfect. She'd put a dragonfly on there, and dragonflies aren't easy to paint at all because I've tried it, but that is beautiful, and the bee as well. So I think that is really, really lovely. And so I've chosen Julie's.
Perfect. Thank you, and thank you, Jane, for judging. And we've actually got a private workshop tomorrow, haven't you? So we're going to be
tomorrow. And I think there's 1 or 2 spaces left, so you've still got time to register. And doing a coastal pathway in St Ives.
St Ives, the arty hotspot of the UK.
The arty hotspot, yeah. And we're in watercolour and some acrylic ink, so it's a really interesting one to do. So if you fancy doing it, just go on to Shopkeep Arty, and I think, like I say, there's 2 places left now.
Yeah, perfect. Great. So thank you, Jane, and I will. Yep, and I will see you tomorrow.
Yep, see you tomorrow.
Okay, bye, Jane. Thanks for that.
Bye.
Well done, Julie. It was a great dandelion. I loved how you took it to the next level with those little insects as well. So do send me your address. If you send that to arty@shopkeepeasy.com, and we'll create a personalised gift for you. Might be a ceramic coaster, might be a wooden postcard thing. I don't really know yet. So just send me your address. That'd be fantastic. We've had some other Q&A comments, Neil. So Rishi's pointed out that Julie may have won twice. So there we go. Rishi's obviously on the ball with that one. So obviously, so well done, Julie. Please pass on my thanks to Neil. That was a fantastic session. Even my husband, who is never interested in art, has sat down and watched Neil and is completely engaged.
Brilliant. Okay, well,
so that's fantastic. Well done. Roland, is your workshop, would it be okay for someone who's not used oils before?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, clearly, if you're a complete beginner that's never done any painting, any drawing, any art at all, and have 2 left feet kind of thing, then it may be a little bit stretching. But no, if you've not worked in oils before, that's absolutely fine. I mean, that's the whole idea. I mean, this is the same exercise that I would teach for one of them. I've series of different exercises I teach with private students, depending on where they are. And clearly, a lot of people come to me because they want to learn to paint skies and paint in a more sort of traditional Dutch style. So if you've not worked with oil before, absolutely not a problem. If you've worked with watercolor or acrylic or anything else for that matter, you'll find, hopefully you will have no problem at all. It's not a particularly difficult exercise.
Yeah,
we've got 3 hours. We're going to be taking our time. I'm going to be walking you through each step, so we're going to be taking our time on it.
Yeah, and it'll be really understanding, because clouds are notoriously difficult to do. So it's kind of understanding how to create something that really looks like a cloud and not a piece of cotton wool, basically.
Absolutely, yeah. The Simpson sky, as I always call it. Sometimes we always end up every now and again, each of us painting a Simpson sky. So we have to try and learn how to avoid that.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Neil. Really enjoyed it. From Sasha, well done, Sasha. Jay Homshide, thank you so much. I've learned so much, so that was great. An anonymous attendee said, what would you do with the strip along the bottom of the painting? What would your intention be with that?
It's a good thing you asked that, because I just looked at thought I haven't mentioned what to do with the strip at the bottom of the painting. So a couple of things, really. I mean, if you wanted to keep that just as simple as it looks at the moment and say this is nothing more than an exercise in working this, then you could simply mix up a darker color and you could go to into a brown, and you could just simply block that in, and just finish that in a very, very dark color. Not quite black, but you know, you could put a much darker band in there. But bearing in mind what that represents in terms of cloud, you know, clouds sat against the backdrop, there'd be nothing stopping you putting in there, you know, some shapes in terms of putting in some sort of trees. So, and what I would do if I was going to do that is I'd use a palette knife. I can just do it really quickly. I might be able to show you. I would just use my palette knife, keep the paint fairly thick, use a little bit of medium. This is where I'm going to be careful, it doesn't slip off here. But to come in and put some thicker paint in and leave some shapes so that you have some volumes of paint. I would paint the surface first, but you could come in and then just kind of dabble in again and start to put an horizon in with some bands of cloud, not bands of cloud, sorry, with some lines of tree, like a tree line. But you want the shapes very sharp, and that will indicate that they are forward, that those shapes are forward of the background, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Because you've done that with your other painting that you showed earlier. You had the darker.
Yeah, with this, yeah, with the practice piece.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, all I did was I started a bit lower. I wanted to set it a little bit higher. Actually, looking at it now, it's a similar sort of height. But yeah, absolutely. So with this, you know, I would, you know, you can just simply go right down to the foreground. But you know, try putting something in. Whether you know, you could use a dark green if you wanted to change the color a little bit. But you know, between the brown and the blue, you can easily start to, you know, and again, use the same technique. Put that on, start to maybe scrape some of it away. Use the brush, use the palette knife, and start to take a little bit away from that. But I'm interested to see what people come up with.
Yeah. Diane's got a question. Diane, you're on mute. Sorry to keep saying you're on mute. I think it does it automatically every time, so you have to remind you to take it off.
No, sorry,
Hi, Diane. Yeah.
I didn't have another question. I just pressed the thing to lower my hand, which obviously put me back up.
Oh, okay.
And thank you.
Okay, well, thank you anyway. I hope you enjoyed it.
We did. I did indeed. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Rishi's got a question as well. Hello, Rishi.
I'm sorry I'm asking so many questions.
That's okay.
That's good.
It shows you're engaged.
Absolutely.
I was just wondering, the painting you've put on the website or the blog, it looks quite different. Is it like does it mean like you can do different colors, or is it just as an example? Just wondering.
Is that the one for the?
They're all examples, really, Rishi, but because every painting is different. So, but it probably depends on the color of your toned board behind and where you start the cloud line, as Niall was explaining. I don't know whether you add anything more to that, Niall.
Yeah, you mean the reference image of this one that we're painting at the moment?
It has bits of pink and orange on it.
Yeah, well, this is the lovely thing about it, is even between using these three colours and obviously technically a fourth colour in the fact that we've got the yellow ochre, it depends very much on how dark or light you've toned your canvas. I mean, if I put this back up again, hopefully you can see the first one I did, my canvas was actually a little bit less, was more lightly toned. If I can do that.
Another thing, did you tone the canvas blue last for the one on Shopkeep Party, or is toning always going to be yellow?
No, toning and grounding can be any colour. All it is a process of removing the white. But for this exercise, because what we want is we obviously want to create this effect of the light shining through the clouds, we want a creamy colour. So whether it's a yellow or a sienna, so it's a red or a yellow, you wouldn't really want to tone it in a blue or a green. You want a warm colour, because what we're doing is by removing that paint, remember, is we're trying to create that effect of that natural effect of light. But you can see how these two are quite different simply because this one I toned much darker, this one I toned much lighter.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Rishi.
Yeah, thanks.
Take care. Happy painting during the week. Brilliant. Well, thanks again, Niall. That's been absolutely fantastic. It's gone a little bit longer than our 45 minutes, but I think it was worth it because we learned so many things there. I'm really looking forward to the workshop next week where we'll be able to have a bit more time and just more comfortably get into things. So thanks very much and see you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Well done.
Yeah. Bye, Niall.
Take care.
Bye from me. Take care.